The relentless thrum of bass vibrated through the floorboards of Ephemeral Light Studios, a chaotic sanctuary carved out of a forgotten Port Meridian warehouse. Anya Petrova, all fiery energy and flying auburn hair, crouched low, her camera a predatory extension of her eye. Yes, Lyra, yes. Arch just a fraction more. Own that light. Her subject, a rising indie musician named Lyra, draped in strategically ripped velvet and bathed in stark, theatrical blues and reds, obeyed. Sweat beaded on Lyra's temples, not just from the heat of the vintage Klieg lights Anya insisted on using, but from the raw vulnerability Anya coaxed from her subjects. It was Anya's gift, her curse maybe, peeling back layers until the soul beneath lay bare for her lens. Ephemeral light wasn't just a name, it was a philosophy. Capturing the fleeting, the fragile, the fiercely real. Today, it was fierce defiance mixed with a dangerous allure for Lyra's album cover. Art. Raw and messy. Anya lived for this controlled chaos, the pulse of creation syncing with the music's heavy beat. She didn't hear the approaching sirens, muffled by the brick walls and the pounding rhythm. Didn't register the heavy thuds outside until the reinforced studio door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges with a screech of tortured metal. Dust motes danced violently in the sudden intrusion of harsh, unfiltered daylight. The music cut off abruptly, replaced by sharp, barked commands. Police! Nobody move! Hands where I can see them! Lyra screamed, stumbling back against a painted backdrop, the carefully crafted pose shattering. Anya's assistant, Leo, a perpetually wide-eyed art student, froze near the light stands, dropping a reflector with a clatter that echoed unnaturally in the sudden silence. Anya instinctively shielded her camera, whipping around, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. And then she saw him. Framed in the brutal gash where the door used to be, flanked by uniformed officers fanning out with tactical precision, stood Captain Damien Cross. Damien. The name itself was a phantom limb, an ache she hadn't felt in, how long? 6 years? 7 lifetimes? He wore the crisp, severe lines of the Port Meridian Police Department uniform like a second skin, all sharp angles and controlled power. The familiar broad shoulders seemed broader, encased in Kevlar. The dark eyes, once pools of shared dreams and whispered secrets under moonlit skies, were now glacial chips of authority, sweeping the room with detached assessment. Their eyes met across the suddenly cavernous space. Time stuttered. The air crackled, thick with unspoken history, with the ghosts of promises they'd made and spectacularly broken. They'd once sketched plans for a life under a different sky, a ramshackle studio by the sea, fueled by art and ambition and a love that felt infinite. A promise shattered like cheap glass the night she'd walked away, leaving him standing alone amidst the wreckage of their future. He hadn't aged conventionally. The lines around his eyes were deeper, etched by things she couldn't imagine, couldn't reconcile with the intense, brilliant physics prodigy she'd loved, the boy who'd mapped constellations in her palm and believed, truly believed, they could defy gravity. Now he was Captain Cross. A wall of impassive duty. For a heartbeat, just one, Anya thought she saw a flicker. A micro-expression. Surprise? Recognition? Pain? It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an unnerving stillness, a professional mask snapping firmly into place. He moved then, fluid and economical, his presence commanding the chaotic scene. His gaze lingered on her, on the expensive camera clutched like a shield, on her paint-splattered jeans and the slightly disheveled state that came with losing herself in her work. There was no warmth, no sign he even remembered the girl who'd traced the lines of his face in the dark. Nothing. He pointed a gloved finger directly at her. Not at Lyra, cowering by the backdrop. Not at Leo, pale and trembling. At Anya. You. Against the wall. Now. The voice. Oh God, the voice. It was his, the same deep timbre that had once murmured poetry against her skin, but now it was flat, devoid of inflection, stripped bare of any shared past. Cold as the steel of the gun holstered at his hip. Anya's breath hitched. Her legs felt like lead. This couldn't be happening. Fate, it seemed, had a particularly cruel and ironic sense of humor. A police raid. Led by him. Here. Now, while she was directing a shoot designed to look provocative, edgy, the bitter absurdity of it threatened to choke her. "Captain," one of his officers questioned, glancing between Damien and Anya. Damien didn't look away from Anya. "Secure the premises. Check IDs. I'll handle Ms. Petrova." Ms. Petrova. The formality was another blow, colder than the February wind whipping off Port Meridian's harbor. He knew exactly who she was. And he was choosing not to know. He advanced towards her, his boots crunching softly on the debris from the door. Anya felt pinned by his gaze, a specimen under a microscope. Her mind raced, scrambling for purchase. What was this about? A noise complaint? Drugs? It made no sense. Her studio was messy, eccentric, but clean. Scrupulously legal. As he reached her, his shadow fell over her, immense and imposing. He didn't touch her immediately, his eyes doing a quick, clinical scan. Then, his hand shot out, fingers strong and impersonal, closing around her upper arm. Not rough, not exactly. But firm. Undeniable. The brief contact sent an unwanted jolt through her system, a phantom echo of a different kind of touch. Turn around. Hands on the wall. The command was quiet, almost conversational, yet absolute. Her pride bristled. Her fear warred with indignation. What is going on? Captain. Damien, you can't just. His grip tightened fractionally, cutting off her protest. The name is Captain Cross. And yes, Ms. Petrova, I can. Cooperate. There it was again. That flicker behind the ice. Was it anger? Or something else? Something buried so deep it barely registered? He turned her, firmly but efficiently, pressing her shoulder against the cool, paint-splattered brick. The smell of turpentine and old dust filled her nostrils. Her cheek scraped slightly against the rough surface. Humiliation burned hot in her chest. To be manhandled like this, by him, the man whose touch she had once craved more than air, it was unbearable. She could feel his presence behind her, close but untouchable. A wall of regulation and resentment. The intense, unresolved energy of their past pulsed between them, a dangerous undercurrent beneath the official procedure. He hadn't forgotten. Not entirely. No matter how hard he tried to pretend, the ghost of what they'd been lingered, unwelcome and undeniable, in the wreckage of her studio door. The irony was a physical weight, pressing down on her as surely as his implied authority, leaving her trapped between the ruins of her past and a present she couldn't comprehend. The professional mask Captain Cross wore couldn't entirely conceal the man Anya Petrova once knew, leaving her reeling in the chaotic aftermath of the raid. Dragged from the jarring reunion into the cold reality of a police investigation, photographer Name found herself navigating a minefield of accusations and painfully awkward encounters with the man who held her past. Pressed against the rough brick, the phantom heat of Damien's proximity lingered even after he stepped back to oversee his team. Anya Petrova squeezed her eyes shut for a fraction of a second, willing the floor to swallow her whole. This wasn't happening. Captain Damien Cross, the boy who'd mapped galaxies for her, was treating her like a common criminal in her own chaotic, paint-splattered sanctuary. The search began with a chilling efficiency that scraped against Anya's nerves. Uniformed officers moved through ephemeral light studios, their movements precise, impersonal. They opened drawers, peered behind stacked canvases, their gloved hands treating her carefully curated props, vintage birdcages, bolts of exotic fabric, strange mannequins, like potential evidence. Leo, her assistant, hovered nearby, stammering explanations about expensive lenses and fragile lighting rigs. That's antique, officer, please be careful. Anya watched it all in a daze, the initial shock slowly morphing into a simmering indignation. A female officer, Riley perhaps, with calm eyes and an air of quiet competence, offered Lyra a bottle of water and spoke to her in low, reassuring tones. Another officer, younger, maybe early 20s, with slightly oversized gear and an earnest flush creeping up his neck, Carter, seemed almost apologetic as he documented the scene with a tablet, occasionally fumbling. He kept glancing nervously at Damien, then at Anya, as if unsure how to navigate the charged atmosphere. Damien remained near the entrance, a still point in the controlled storm. He conferred quietly with a plainclothes detective Anya hadn't noticed before, an older man with tired eyes. Their voices were low murmurs, impossible to decipher over the sounds of the search. Anya straightened, pulling her shoulders back, trying to project an aura of composure she absolutely did not feel. Exposed. That's how she felt. Stripped bare under the clinical gaze of strangers and, worse, under the icy regard of the one person whose opinion had once mattered more than anything. Finally, the detective approached her, Damien a half-step behind him, an intimidating shadow. "Ms. Petrova," the detective began, his voice gravelly. "We received an anonymous tip regarding alleged prostitution activities being conducted on these premises." Anya stared at him, speechless for a moment. Then, laughter bubbled up, sharp and incredulous. "Prostitution? Here? Are you actually serious?" She gestured wildly around the studio, at the artistic clutter, the dramatic lighting setup, Lyra still looking shell-shocked nearby. "This is a photography studio. We were doing a shoot for an album cover. Look around you." The detective's expression didn't change. "We investigate all tips, ma'am." Anya's gaze snapped to Damien. He stood impassive, arms crossed over his chest, his face unreadable granite. But she saw it. Or maybe she imagined it? A slight tightening around his mouth? A flicker in those dark eyes before they became flat and official again? "Captain," she challenged, her voice trembling slightly despite her anger. "You know this is ridiculous. You know me." The use of his first name, even implied, hung heavy in the air. He met her gaze directly then, and the coldness in his eyes was absolute. "My officers are conducting a thorough investigation based on the information received, Ms. Petrova. Standard procedure. No hint of recognition. No shared history acknowledged. Just the captain and the potential suspect." The rejection was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The search yielded nothing, of course. No drugs, no wads of unexplained cash, no terrified victims hiding behind the backdrops. Just art supplies, expensive camera gear, and a slightly bewildered musician. Officer Riley gave Anya a small, almost imperceptible nod as she reported back to Damien. "Cleared." But it wasn't over. The detective sighed. "All right, seems like a bogus tip. Malicious, probably. We'll look into the source. But we'll still need you to come down to the precinct to make a formal statement, Miss Petrova." "Just procedure." Anya bristled. "You tear my studio apart based on some crank call, treat me like a criminal, and now you want me to waste hours at the station?" "It's required," Damien cut in, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned to Lyra and Leo. "You two are free to go once your details are confirmed." As the other officers began packing up, Damien's gaze fell on Anya again. She was still in the slightly revealing top she'd worn for demonstrating poses, her hair wild, smudges of blue paint on her cheek. He frowned, a minuscule crease between his brows. Before she could react, he moved swiftly towards a pile of discarded fabrics near a backdrop stand. He picked up a length of deep crimson silk, ironically, a piece she'd planned to use for a shoot about fallen angels, and strode back towards her. "Here." He held it out. Not gently. Not unkindly. Just, neutrally. An offering? An order? Confused, Anya hesitated. He didn't wait. With an efficiency that spoke of countless drills, he draped the heavy silk around her shoulders, his gloved fingers brushing her collarbone for a fleeting, electric instant. It wasn't intimate, yet the proximity was suffocating. She could smell the faint, sterile scent of his uniform, maybe something underneath, soap? Vaguely familiar? Drowned out by the sharp tang of adrenaline and old resentment. She felt trapped, bundled like a parcel, the luxurious fabric a stark contrast to the rough treatment. Embarrassment warred with a confusing spark of something else. A ghost of familiarity in the way his hand had moved, precise and sure. Damn him. Damn him for making her feel anything at all. Her mind spun. How? How did the quiet, intense boy who meticulously calculated escape velocities and debated theoretical physics until dawn transform into this enforcer? This Captain Cross? He'd been all sharp intellect and gentle hands then, passionate about uncovering the universe's secrets. Now, his hands enforced the city's laws, and his passion seemed extinguished. Buried under layers of ice and duty. Had she done that? Had her careless, cruel words that night 6 years ago extinguished the fire in him, leaving only this disciplined coldness? The thought was a shard of guilt twisting in her gut. My fault. This is my fault. Leo approached tentatively as Damien stepped back. Anya? Are you okay? Do you need me to come with you? Anya forced a shaky smile. No, Leo. You go. Help Lyra. I'll handle this. Handle this? She couldn't even handle standing upright without feeling like the world was tilting. She tried to take a step forward, projecting confidence she didn't possess, maybe intending to argue further with Damien about the necessity of the station visit. But her ankle twisted on a stray cable hidden under the debris from the door. With a small, undignified yelp, she pitched forward. The impact was like hitting a brick wall. Solid, unyielding muscle beneath the protective vest. For a humiliating second, she scrambled against him, her hands flailing uselessly against the rough fabric of his uniform. He didn't immediately catch her, his body remaining rigid, forcing her to endure the full mortification of the stumble. Then, strong hands clapped onto her upper arms, steadying her, pulling her upright but pointedly not pulling her closer. His touch was impersonal, corrective, but it burned through the silk. Watch your step, Miss Petrova. His voice was low, dangerously close to her ear, still utterly devoid of warmth. Just a statement of fact. Anya flushed crimson, pulling back as quickly as she could, clutching the silk tighter around herself. The air crackled with renewed tension, thick with embarrassment and the unresolved energy between them. The detective cleared his throat, breaking the spell. All right, Captain. We're clear here. Officer Riley and Carter can finish up. He gave Anya a brief, impersonal nod. Sorry for the disturbance, ma'am. Damien barely acknowledged him. His focus remained on Anya, his expression utterly unreadable. The official investigation was over. The false accusation dismissed. Yet, as he stood there, silhouetted against the broken doorway, nothing felt resolved. He gestured curtly towards the exit, a silent command for her to precede him. The storm inside the studio had passed, but stepping outside, into the forced intimacy of whatever came next, felt like walking directly into the eye of a far more personal hurricane. The storm inside the studio had passed, but stepping outside, into the forced intimacy of whatever came next, felt like walking directly into the eye of a far more personal hurricane. The short walk to the unmarked police sedan parked haphazardly at the curb was excruciating. Silence stretched between Anya and Damien, thick and heavy as the humid Port Meridian air. She clutched the crimson silk around her like armor, acutely aware of the ripped velvet beneath, the smudged paint on her cheek, the utter disarray of her carefully constructed world. He walked beside her, not touching, but his presence was an almost physical pressure, radiating cold authority and something else, something that felt disturbingly like tightly controlled resentment. He opened the back door for her. A courtesy? Or just procedure, keeping the suspect contained? Anya slid onto the unforgiving vinyl seat, the scent of stale coffee and disinfectant assaulting her senses. Damien shut the door with a decisive click and rounded the car to get behind the wheel. No chatter from the radio. Just the oppressive silence and the ghosts swirling in the confined space. The drive to the Metro Central precinct was a blur of gray buildings and Anya's racing thoughts. How had they come to this? Her Damien, the intense, shy genius who'd blushed when she first brazenly asked him out after accidentally spilling soda all over his quantum mechanics textbook, was now Captain Cross, a man who looked at her as if she were a piece of inconvenient paperwork. He'd been a transfer student their senior year, brilliant and solitary, a puzzle she'd been determined to solve. She'd practically bulldozed her way into his life, using the flimsy excuse of needing physics tutoring she barely needed. He saw through it, of course. Eventually. But he'd let her in anyway. God, those nights. Sprawled on the floor of her parents' attic, surrounded by textbooks and her chaotic sketches, him patiently explaining complex theories, his voice a low, mesmerizing rumble. Then the talk would shift, straying from physics to philosophy, to dreams of escaping their small town, of building something real, something theirs. He'd trace constellations on her hand, his touch hesitant at first, then electric. He'd confessed his fear of crowds, his awkwardness, his secret passion for terrible B-movies. She'd seen the vulnerable boy beneath the intimidating intellect. And she'd loved him. Fiercely. Completely. Until she'd ruined it. Utterly. The memory slammed into her, sharp and unwelcome. Senior year pressure. The upcoming final exams. The casual cruelty of Sarah Jenkins and her clique in the hallway, their mocking whispers loud enough to carry. How did someone like her land Damien Cross? Must be pity. He's way too good for her. Her own insecurities, the few extra pounds she'd gained from stress eating, her solid B average next to his effortless genius, had flared into defensive anger. She'd lashed out, not at them, but at him, wanting to prove, what? That she wasn't clinging? That she wasn't intimidated? The words tumbled out, ugly and sharp, fueled by adolescent fear. Oh, Damien? He's brilliant, sure. But maybe too brilliant. All mind, no muscle. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if he could even protect me if things got rough. He's just so skinny. She hadn't known he was right there, just around the corner, coming to walk her home. The look on his face, stunned disbelief, then a shuddering, a withdrawal so complete it felt like watching a light extinguish. He hadn't waited for an explanation she couldn't have given anyway. He just turned and walked away, the slump in his usually proud shoulders a condemnation sharper than any words. Tomorrow's the exam, Anya, he'd said, his voice hollow. Guess my help ends here. And just like that, their shared universe had collapsed into a black hole of her making. Regret had been her constant companion ever since. The car pulled into the sally port of the precinct, jolting Anya back to the humiliating present. Damien led her through echoing corridors, his hand briefly on the small of her back, again, impersonal, guiding, as they navigated the bustling station. He deposited her in a small, sterile interview room and left her there with Officer Riley and the tired-eyed detective. The formal statement was brief, perfunctory. Yes, she was Anya Petrova, owner of Ephemeral Light Studios. No, she wasn't running a brothel. Yes, the anonymous tip was baseless slander. Officer Riley was polite, professional. The detective seemed mostly bored, signing off on the paperwork with a grunt. As Riley gathered the forms, she offered a sympathetic smile. Sorry about the mess back there, Miss Petrova. We get these malicious calls sometimes. Jealous competitors, usually. Right, Anya muttered, rubbing her arms. The silk felt suddenly suffocating. The detective cleared his throat. We'll follow up on the source of the call. For now, you're free to go. He nodded towards the door where Damien now stood, leaning against the frame, arms crossed again, his face an impenetrable mask. Waiting. This was her chance. Maybe the only one she'd get. Anya stood, pulling the silk tighter. She ignored the detective and Officer Riley, walking straight towards Damien. Captain Cross, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. About the damage to my studio door. And the rough handling. She deliberately rubbed her upper arm where his grip had been tightest. I assume the department takes responsibility? A ripple of interest went through the nearby bullpen. Officer Carter, the flushed cop from the studio, visibly perked up, nudging the officer next to him. Damien's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Any complaints regarding property damage or officer conduct should be filed through the official internal affairs channels, Ms. Petrova. Forms are available at the front desk. His voice was pure ice, a dismissal so complete it stunned more than the earlier accusations. He was offering her bureaucratic runaround, not an ounce of personal accountability. Or, Anya pressed, refusing to back down, fueled by a sudden surge of defiance and hurt. "You could just give me your number, Captain, so we can sort it out directly. Since you were in charge." Carter choked back a laugh, quickly disguised as a cough when Damien shot him a look that could freeze lava. "Whoa, direct approach." "Go Anya," someone muttered from a nearby desk. Damien's jaw clenched. He pushed off the doorframe, his sheer physical presence making Anya instinctively want to step back. "My contact information is not relevant. File the report." Rejection. Absolute. Kurt warred with a stubbornness she didn't know she still possessed regarding him. Fine. If he wanted official channels, maybe she could work with that. But the sting remained, sharp and deep. The boy who'd shared his soul with her wouldn't even share a phone number. Days crawled by. The incident at the studio became a gnawing obsession. Anya couldn't focus, couldn't shoot. Damien's icy dismissal replayed in her mind. Fueled by a potent cocktail of regret, lingering affection, and pure stubbornness, and maybe a little encouragement from Officer Riley during a follow-up call about the bogus tip. "He's tough, Captain Cross, but, well, everyone has a past, right?" Anya hatched a plan. A terrible, probably doomed plan. She showed up at Metro Central during what she hoped was a shift change, armed with 2 boxes of expensive pastries from Port Meridian Patisserie and a carrier loaded with artisanal coffees. Enough for the whole squad. She charmed the desk sergeant, bantered with a surprised Officer Carter, and even got a small smile from Officer Riley. She strategically left the most decadent pastry and a complex, triple-shot macchiato with Damien's name scrawled on the cup near his empty desk. An olive branch. A ridiculously overpriced, caffeine and sugar-laden olive branch. She waited, pretending to chat with Riley, her heart thudding. And then he appeared, striding through the bullpen, files tucked under his arm. He stopped dead when he saw her. His face darkened instantly. Oh, this was a bad idea. A truly terrible idea. Before she could lose her nerve, Anya intercepted him, holding out the elaborate coffee. Captain Cross. Peace offering? He didn't even glance at the cup. His eyes, cold and assessing, pinned her in place. "What are you doing here, Petrova?" "Just bringing treats? Saying thanks to the officers who, cleared things up?" Smooth, Anya. Real smooth. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He looked from her to the coffee, then back to her face, his expression laced with something that looked dangerously like contempt. "Is this how it works now? You think you can waltz in here with pastries and coffee and smooth things over? Was the tutoring just a warm-up act for this kind of manipulation?" The accusation hit her like a physical slap. Manipulation? Tutoring? He thought, after all this time, he still thought that's all it had been? Just her using him? The unfairness, the sheer wrongness of it, choked her. "Damien, no. That's not. It's Captain Cross," he bit out, his voice dangerously low. "And I don't fall for the same trick twice. Are we clear?" He took a step closer, invading her space, the controlled anger radiating off him in palpable waves. Anya flinched, rubbing her arm instinctively, the same one he'd grabbed at the studio. It still felt vaguely bruised, a physical reminder of their disastrous reunion. His eyes flickered down to her movement. His expression remained hard, unyielding, but something shifted almost imperceptibly in his stance. Duty? Liability? Or something else entirely buried beneath the ice? He reached out, his fingers unexpectedly closing around her wrist, his touch firm, almost clinical. "You're claiming injury from the other day?" Anya swallowed, confused by the sudden shift. "My arm, it's a little sore, yes." He nodded curtly, releasing her as abruptly as he'd grabbed her. "Fine. Let's go." "Hospital." "Hospital? What for?" "To document the injury," he stated flatly, already turning towards the exit. "Department policy. We need an official medical report to settle the debt." The flimsy excuse hung in the air, transparently inadequate. He wasn't concerned about her well-being, He was covering departmental bases, or perhaps, creating a reason, any reason, to get her out of his precinct and, paradoxically, into his enforced proximity once more. He paused at the door, looking back at her, his face unreadable but his intention clear. He was taking her. Whether she wanted to go or not. The fragile thread of hope she'd clung to snapped as Captain Cross retreated once more behind his wall of indifference, leaving Anya to confront her mistakes alone, now under official police escort. The fragile thread of hope she'd clung to snapped as Captain Cross retreated once more behind his wall of indifference, leaving Anya to confront her mistakes alone, now under official police escort. The silence in the unmarked sedan was a physical entity, pressing in on Anya, thick with unspoken accusations and the suffocating weight of 6 years of distance. Damien drove with rigid focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the Port Meridian traffic. Anya stared out the window, watching the familiar cityscape blur past, feeling trapped not just by the car doors, but by the chasm that yawned between them. This sterile, procedural journey to document a non-existent injury felt like the ultimate insult. The debt he spoke of wasn't departmental liability, it was the one she owed him, the one she'd been paying interest on, alone, for years. She couldn't stand it. The silence, the pretense, the glacial wall he'd erected. Impulse, sharp and desperate, surged through her. Before she could second-guess it, she leaned slightly across the console, her voice low, raw. Damien. He didn't flinch, didn't look at her. But she saw the muscle jump in his tightly clenched jaw. Damien, please, she tried again, her hand hovering near his arm on the gearshift before she snatched it back. Coward. What I said, back then, it was stupid. Cruel. I was scared and insecure in taking it out on you because you were everything. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and unwelcome. I've regretted it every single day since. Every single day. Her voice broke on the last word. I only ever. Is there any chance? For us? Could we even talk? His profile remained utterly still, carved from stone. For a moment, she thought he might not respond at all. Then, his voice came out flat, devoid of any emotion, yet somehow cutting deeper than anger would have. The department requires a medical report to formally address any potential liability claims arising from official police actions, Ms. Petrova. He finally turned his head, his eyes meeting hers, and they were devastatingly empty. This visit ensures all procedural requirements are met. That is all. Rejection. Cold, absolute, procedural rejection. It knocked the breath out of her. He wasn't just shutting her down, he was categorizing her pain, her desperate plea, as a potential lawsuit. He was reducing them, everything they had been, everything she still felt, to a line item on a departmental form. Something inside her snapped. The hurt recoiled, replaced by a flash of her old, stubborn pride. Fine, she said, her voice brittle. Forget I said anything. And forget the hospital. My arm is perfectly fine. Just, drop me off here. He didn't argue. He pulled the car over sharply beside the curb, a block from her apartment building. The abruptness of it was another dismissal. He cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension. He got out, walked around, and opened her passenger door, his face impassive. As she scrambled out, legs shaky, clutching the borrowed silk, he reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 crisp $50 bills, shoving them into her hand. Anya stared at the money, then up at his unreadable face. It felt like blood money. Payment for services rendered, the service of ripping her past open and leaving it bleeding on her studio floor. Before she could find words, any words, an insult, a protest, another broken plea, he turned on his heel and strode back to the car, got in, and drove away without a backward glance. Leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk, clutching his money, the ghost of his presence, and the crushing weight of his indifference. Just like 6 years ago. Some things, apparently, never changed. She stumbled back to her apartment, the vibrant energy of the earlier photoshoot completely extinguished, replaced by a hollow ache. The confrontation, the rejection, it was worse than she could have imagined. There was only one person who could possibly understand, or at least, offer the unique blend of sympathy and brutal honesty Anya needed right now. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling slightly, and dialed. An hour later, Anya was slumped in a worn armchair at the Daily Grind, their favorite downtown cafe, a place perpetually buzzing with students, artists, and the low hum of caffeinated conversation. Across the small, scarred table sat Chloe Dubois, fashion boutique owner, self-proclaimed love guru, mostly based on observing others' disasters, and Anya's fiercely loyal best friend since college. Chloe, impeccably dressed as always in sharp vintage, listened intently as Anya poured out the whole sordid tale: the raid, the shock of seeing Damien, the cold shoulder, the station, the coffee incident, the final, crushing dismissal. Chloe took a long sip of her espresso, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows raised. "Okay, let me get this straight," she said, her voice laced with her characteristic blend of wry amusement and genuine concern. "Captain Damien, ghost of heartbreak past, Cross bursts into your studio like some avenging angel, treats you like dirt, accuses you of running a questionable business, then practically accuses you of manipulating him back in the day when you offered him a damn latte?" Anya winced. "Basically. Yeah. And your grand plan for reconciliation after 6 years of radio silence was pastries? It seemed like a good idea at the time." Anya protested weakly, burying her face in her hands. "God, Chloe, it was awful. The way he looked at me, like I was nothing. Less than nothing. Just procedure." Chloe leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Okay, honey, deep breaths. First of all, screw him and his procedure. He sounds like he's got a 10-foot pole shoved somewhere deeply uncomfortable. Secondly, you threw coffee and baked goods at a man who clearly has max-level emotional armor deployed. What did you expect?" "I don't know." Anya wailed softly. "Maybe a flicker? A hint that he remembers? That any of it mattered?" "Anya," Chloe said gently, but firmly. "He's a cop now. A captain, apparently. People change. Especially people who get their hearts ripped out and stomped on by, let's be honest, a slightly clueless teenager who couldn't handle her own insecurities." "Hey. Truth hurts, darling," Chloe shrugged, unapologetic. "You messed up back then. Royally. But showing up with a bare claw isn't exactly a masterclass in mending deep emotional wounds, is it?" She paused, stirring her coffee. "So, what now? You gonna stalk him at the precinct? Leave anonymous poetry on his squad car?" "Shut up," Anya muttered, though a tiny smile touched her lips. Chloe's cynicism was strangely comforting. "I don't know what to do. It just hurts. Seeing him like that. So cold." "Well, you could always." Chloe's words were cut off by a sudden, sharp cry from the front of the cafe. It wasn't loud at first, more startled than panicked. Then came the unmistakable, terrifying sound of shattering glass. A collective gasp went through the crowded room, conversations halting mid-sentence. Heads turned towards the entrance. A man's voice, rough and desperate, yelling incoherently. A woman screamed, a raw sound of pure terror. More shouting. The clatter of chairs overturning as people scrambled backwards, away from the entrance. Anya's blood ran cold. She instinctively grabbed Chloe's arm, pulling her down. Under the table. Now. They huddled together in the cramped space, the scent of spilled coffee and fear thick in the air. Anya risked a peek. A man, wild-eyed and disheveled, stood near the counter, holding a terrified young barista in front of him like a shield. He wasn't holding a gun, thank God, but he brandished the jagged neck of a broken beer bottle, its edge glinting menacingly under the cafe lights. Oh God. A hostage situation. Here. Suddenly, Anya felt Chloe shaking violently beside her. Not just trembling, full-body tremors. Chloe, who faced down aggressive landlords and cutthroat fashion buyers without blinking. Chloe, who'd once calmly talked down a mugger trying to snatch her vintage Chanel bag. But now? Her eyes were wide, unfocused, staring blankly at the underside of the table. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "Chloe? Hey, Chloe, look at me." Anya gripped her friend's shoulders. "It's okay. We're hidden. He doesn't see us." The shouting, Chloe whispered, her voice thin and reedy, unrecognizable. Loud, angry men, breaking things. Her whole body shuddered. Anya remembered fragments Chloe had let slip over the years, a volatile stepfather, slammed doors, things thrown, hiding in closets as a child. This wasn't just fear of the present danger, this was a raw, primal terror clawing its way up from Chloe's past. Anya had to do something. Anything. Distract her. Ground her. Anchor her to the here and now, or rather, pull her somewhere else entirely. Anywhere but that dark place Chloe's mind had retreated to. Chloe, Anya said again, her voice low and urgent, forcing Chloe to meet her eyes. Listen to me. Forget this. Forget the noise. Remember high school? Remember Damien? Chloe blinked, her eyes still wide with terror, but a flicker of confusion entered them. Damien? Yeah. Mr. Physics Genius. Mr. Socially Awkward Walking Disaster until I forced myself on him. Anya attempted a shaky smile. Remember how we met? Me, crashing into him outside the library, his notes going everywhere? And he just knelt there, meticulously trying to reorder them by theoretical principle while I tried not to die of embarrassment? She kept talking, weaving the story, pouring out details she hadn't shared even with Chloe before. The initial fascination, the calculated campaign to get his attention, the thrill of finally breaking through his reserve. The late nights, the shared laughter over bad sci-fi movies, the way he'd look at her sometimes, like she was the most complex, fascinating equation he'd ever encountered. The sheer, head-spinning intensity of first love. She described their secret spot overlooking the city lights, the dreams they'd spun, the future they'd mapped out. Then, her voice faltered as she reached the inevitable shadow. The pressure, the stupid teenage insecurities flaring up, the poisonous words spoken in anger and fear, the look on his face when he overheard. The immediate, crushing weight of her regret. She didn't know if Chloe was truly listening, but the violent trembling had subsided slightly, replaced by a focused stillness. Anya kept talking, lost in the bittersweet ache of the past, the words tumbling out, a confession whispered under the table while chaos reigned just feet away. Outside their small, terrified bubble, the sounds of the crisis escalated, more shouting, the distant wail of approaching sirens slicing through the panic murmur of the hidden cafe patrons. Trapped between a knife-wielding criminal and the ghosts of her past, photographer name could only watch as the man she'd hurt prepared to risk everything. She didn't know if Chloe was truly listening, but the violent trembling had subsided slightly, replaced by a focused stillness. Anya kept talking, lost in the bittersweet ache of the past, the words tumbling out, a confession whispered under the table while chaos reigned just feet away. Outside their small, terrified bubble, the sounds of the crisis escalated, more shouting, the distant wail of approaching sirens slicing through the panic murmur of the hidden cafe patrons. The acrid smell of fear mingled with stale coffee grounds. Just as Anya whispered the final, painful words of her high school confession, and he just walked away. And my whole world ended right there. Her gaze flickered towards the rain-streaked window facing the street. Red and blue lights strobed silently, painting the terrified faces huddled inside with fleeting, garish color. And then, she saw him. Emerging from a tactical van, pulling on heavy gloves, checking the strap of a vest that added bulk to his already imposing frame. Damien Cross. Captain Cross. He moved with a lethal grace that stole her breath, coordinating his team with sharp hand signals, his face set in lines of intense concentration. Dawn was any trace of the introspective boy who'd wrestled with abstract concepts. This man dealt in harsh realities, in calculated risks and swift action. He was magnificent. Terrifyingly capable. And the sight sent a confusing, painful wave of regret and something dangerously close to admiration crashing through her. This was the man forged from the boy she had so carelessly wounded? The skinny teenager she'd mocked for not being strong enough? Oh, the bitter irony. He was strength personified now, a shield against the very chaos threatening to engulf them. Suddenly, the hostage-taker inside the cafe became agitated by the growing police presence, his voice rising in frantic threats. He yanked the poor barista, sobbing uncontrollably, closer to the front window, using her as a human shield. His eyes darted wildly. Then, they locked onto the movement under Anya and Chloe's table. A guttural shout erupted from him as he started dragging the barista towards their flimsy sanctuary. "Stay back! I see you! I'll do it!" Anya's heart leaped into her throat. Simultaneously, she saw Damien's sharp gesture through the window, not towards the main door, but towards a smaller side window near their table, slightly obscured by a large potted plant. He caught her eye, a split-second connection across the chaos, his expression urgent. The lock, his eyes seemed to command. "Now!" Panic surged. Anya scrambled on hands and knees towards the side window, Chloe a deadweight clinging to her arm. Her fingers, clumsy with fear, fumbled with the old, stiff latch. It wouldn't budge. Stuck. Oh God, stuck. The hostage-taker was only feet away now, the jagged bottle raised. "Get down!" Damien's roar seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, amplified through a bullhorn outside. It wasn't directed at her. In the same instant, with an explosive crash, the large plate glass window near the counter imploded inwards in a blinding shower of safety glass. Dark figures swarmed in, moving with terrifying speed and precision. The air filled with shouts, the thud of bodies, the sharp crack of something. Anya squeezed her eyes shut, pulling Chloe down flat, shielding her head with her arms. It was over almost as quickly as it began. Maybe a minute. Maybe two. An eternity. When Anya dared to look up, the wild-eyed man was face down on the floor, hands cuffed securely behind his back, groaning. The barista was being gently led away by a paramedic, wrapped in a shock blanket. Uniformed officers were securing the scene, their movements calm now, routine. The adrenaline hangover hit Anya like a wave, leaving her weak and shaky. Officer Carter, the young cop from her studio, appeared beside their table, his face pale but relieved. "Ms. Petrova? Ms. Dubois? Are you ladies all right?" Chloe, surprisingly, was the first to recover her trademark sharpness, though her voice still held a slight tremor. She pushed herself up, brushing glass fragments off her impeccable trousers, and pointed dramatically to a thin red scratch on her forearm where she'd scraped it diving for cover. "All right? All right? Officer, I've been traumatized. Held hostage, practically. By a maniac with questionable taste in improvised weaponry. My vintage silk blouse may be irreparably damaged. I demand compensation. And danger pay. And definitely a complimentary hot latte. This establishment clearly owes me." Carter blinked, momentarily flustered. Ma'am, we'll take your statement, of course." Then Damien was there. He'd shed the heavy tactical vest, revealing the dark uniform beneath, stark against the cafe's wreckage. His hair was slightly damp from the rain, plastered to his forehead. The rigid control was still there, but the edges seemed frayed, the ice in his eyes perhaps thawed by a degree or two by the residual heat of action. His gaze swept over Chloe, then landed on Anya, lingering for a charged second. Assessing. Was that relief she saw in the depths? Or just assessment? He knelt beside Chloe, his voice professional but lacking the earlier biting edge. "Let me see that, Ms. Dubois." He examined the scratch with detached efficiency, pulling a small first aid kit from a pouch on his belt. As he cleaned the minor wound and applied a bandage, his movements were precise, almost gentle. Oddly clinical care. Chloe, however, seemed less interested in her arm and more interested in the palpable tension radiating between Anya and her captain. "Honestly, Captain," she declared, conveniently wincing as he applied the bandage, "it's not the scratch, it's the shock. My delicate constitution, you know." She gestured towards Anya, who was now leaning heavily against the table leg, looking decidedly green around the gills. "And look at poor Anya. White as a sheet. She was closer to that lunatic than I was. Nearly got shish kebab trying to unlock the damn window you pointed at. She's clearly not well. Someone really ought to make sure she gets home safely. Wouldn't you agree, Captain?" Chloe finished with a look so pointed it could have drilled through steel. Master manipulator, that one. Damien straightened, his gaze fixed on Anya's pale face. He hesitated. Just for a heartbeat. Anya saw the internal struggle play out across his features, duty warring with something else. Annoyance? Reluctance? Or a deeply buried flicker of concern? The detective nearby gave a subtle nod. Permission granted. Or perhaps, burden assigned. He turned back to Anya, his expression hardening again, but the absolute zero was gone. All right, Petrova. Let's go. You look like you're about to pass out. Before Anya could form a coherent protest, before she could insist she was fine, he moved. In one swift, shocking motion, he bent down and scooped her effortlessly into his arms. Bridal style. The world tilted. Anya gasped, her hands flying instinctively to clasp around his neck. Suddenly, she was pressed against the solid wall of his chest, the rough texture of his uniform against her cheek, his scent, rain, adrenaline, and that faint, achingly familiar underlying note, filling her senses. It was shockingly intimate. Disorienting. Mortifying. And yet, beneath the humiliation, a treacherous warmth curled deep inside her. Being held by him, strong and solid, it felt like a distant echo of walking home together under the stars, safe and impossibly young. Put me down. She mumbled against his shoulder, utterly embarrassed by the surprised stares of the remaining officers and cafe patrons. Stop struggling, he growled, his voice a low rumble near her ear, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. He carried her out through the shattered window frame, into the flashing lights and the curious eyes of the gathering crowd, his stride long and purposeful. The ride back to her apartment building was conducted in a silence even heavier than before. He pulled up to the curb, cut the engine, and this time, he got out and came around to her side, opening the door. He didn't offer a hand, just stood back, waiting. Anya practically tumbled out, her legs still unsteady. They stood facing each other on the damp sidewalk under the sickly yellow glow of a streetlight. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling of wet pavement and exhaustion. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a raw, jangled awareness. Of the danger they'd just passed through. Of the years stretching between them. Of the undeniable something that still sparked in the charged space separating them. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since that initial, shocking moment in the studio. His carefully constructed walls seemed to crack, revealing the turbulent emotions beneath, confusion, exhaustion, anger, regret, and something else, something vulnerable she hadn't seen since high school. And then, the carefully controlled dam inside him broke. He didn't speak. He moved, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up, cupping her face, his palms rough against her skin. His eyes blazed with an intensity that mirrored the storm that had just passed. And then his mouth was on hers. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was a collision. A desperate, hungry claiming, fueled by 6 years of repressed longing, anger, hurt, and the stark, terrifying reminder of mortality they'd both just faced. It was the force of a flash flood, overwhelming, undeniable. His lips were demanding, bruising, tasting of rain and something fundamentally Danian. Anya gasped into the kiss, shock warring with a desperate, answering need. Her hands tangled in his damp hair, pulling him closer, meeting his ferocity with her own pent-up storm of emotions. Regret and resentment and longing and a love she tried so hard to bury all crashed together in that single, shattering kiss. He broke away abruptly, leaving them both breathless, chests heaving, staring at each other in the dim streetlight. Shock radiated from him, mirroring her own. His eyes were wide, dark pools reflecting confusion in raw, unfiltered emotion. The air crackled. The carefully constructed walls between them, already damaged, had just been blown to smithereens. Nothing felt certain, except the undeniable fact that something profound, something irreversible, had just shifted between them. The kiss hung in the air, a question mark shattering the silence, leaving them both breathless and uncertain of the path forward. The kiss hung in the air, a question mark shattering the silence, leaving them both breathless and uncertain of the path forward. The short elevator ride up to Anya's loft apartment was thick with an awkwardness so profound it felt like static electricity. Damien stood rigidly at the back, eyes fixed on the changing floor numbers, while Anya stared determinedly at her own scuffed boots, acutely aware of the faint tremor in her hands and the lingering imprint of his lips on hers. What had just happened? Adrenaline? A momentary lapse in his carefully constructed defenses? Or something more? Inside her apartment, a sprawling space that usually buzzed with creative energy but now felt unnervingly quiet, the tension only amplified. Canvases leaned against exposed brick walls, props were scattered with artistic intent, the air smelled faintly of oil paint and darkroom chemicals. Home. Yet, with Damien standing stiffly just inside the door, it felt alien territory. He looked profoundly out of place, his sharp uniform a stark contrast to the bohemian chaos she cultivated. He ran a hand through his damp hair, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on a stack of photography books, anywhere but at her. Coffee? Anya heard herself offer, the words sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Anything to break the silence. Anything to have something to do. He gave a curt nod, still not meeting her eyes. Thanks. She busied herself at the small kitchenette counter, grateful for the mundane task. Her hands shook as she scooped coffee grounds into the filter. Behind her, she could hear him moving restlessly, the soft thud of his boots on the worn wooden floorboards. He stopped near her drafting table, picked up a framed photo, one she'd taken years ago, a black and white shot of Port Meridian's docks shrouded in fog. A lifetime ago. Before him. Before everything. Still chasing shadows, Petrova? His voice was low, closer than she expected. Still carefully neutral, but the question held a hint of something else. Not quite teasing. Maybe, curiosity? Anya turned, holding two steaming mugs. It's what I do, Cross. She matched his formality, handing him a mug. Their fingers brushed. Another jolt. Both pretended not to notice. They stood there, awkwardly sipping coffee, the unspoken questions hanging heavy between them. Where do we go from here? What did that kiss mean? Can 6 years of hurt and silence be bridged? It felt impossible. Too much wreckage. Too many ghosts. Just as Anya was about to risk another tentative question, Damien's phone buzzed insistently on his belt. He glanced down at the caller ID, and a complex mix of affection and weariness flickered across his features before he composed himself and answered. Hey, his voice softened fractionally. Yeah, I'm okay. Just wrapping things up. A pause. He listened, his brow furrowing slightly. Rough one down at the grind, but it's contained. Another pause. No, Mom Lucia, I promise I'm fine. Really? He glanced quickly at Anya, then looked away again, a faint flush creeping up his neck. Anya? Yeah, she's here. Just finalizing her statement. Liar, Anya thought, her heart sinking. He can't even admit he brought me home. Look, can I call you back in a bit? Things are still busy. He listened again, nodding slightly. Okay. Love you too. Bye. He clipped the phone back onto his belt, the silence descending once more, now charged with Anya's sudden, sharp insecurity. Mom Lucia? The name echoed in her head. Who was that? The concerned tone, the easy love you too, it sounded intimate. Familiar. Was this the family Isabella Rossi, the girl from the cafe, belonged to? Did Damien have another life, a whole support system she knew nothing about? A life where someone called him, worried about him, loved him? A life that didn't include her? The old, familiar urge to retreat, to build her walls higher before he could hurt her again, washed over her. She took an involuntary step back, wrapping her arms around herself. Damien saw the movement, saw the withdrawn look cloud her eyes. He sighed, a deep, weary sound, finally scrubbing a hand over his face, the rigid control slipping. Anya, he began, his voice rougher now, less guarded. Look, he hesitated, searching for the right words. Mom Lucia, that's Isabella's mother. Signora Rossi. Isa and I, our families have been neighbors forever. Her dad and mine were colleagues. After my parents passed, he swallowed, the admission costing him. Well, the Rossis, they kind of adopted me. Mom Lucia, she just worries. Like she worries about Isa. He finally met Anya's eyes, his own filled with a surprising vulnerability. ISA's the girl you saw earlier. She's like the annoying little sister I never had. Drives me crazy half the time. She's engaged to a doctor up in Seattle now, planning some ridiculously elaborate wedding. He offered a faint, self-deprecating smile. There's nothing. We're just family. Okay? The explanation, the unexpected glimpse behind his armor, disarmed Anya. The knot of insecurity loosened slightly. Oh, she managed. Okay. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking again, charged with a different kind of energy now. Less hostile, more fragile. Okay, he repeated, his gaze searching hers. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He let out another long breath. That kiss, he started, then stopped, shaking his head slightly as if confused by his own actions. Anya, what are we doing? He looked at her then, the vulnerability stark, the ice completely gone, replaced by a deep-seated fear she recognized because she felt it too. The first time, when you left. I thought it would actually kill me. I rebuilt my entire life from the ground up because I couldn't. I couldn't bear feeling that again. His voice was low, intense. I can't go through that twice. I won't. So you need to tell me. Was that, he gestured vaguely between them, the air still humming from the kiss, just adrenaline? Old times? Playing around because everything went sideways today? Because if it was, his gaze hardened again, protective instincts kicking in. If you're just going to walk away again. No. The denial burst out of her, fierce and immediate. She reached out, grabbing his arm, needing the physical connection, needing him to believe her. His muscle tensed beneath her fingers, but he didn't pull away. No, Damien. It wasn't adrenaline. Not just playing. She met his fearful gaze, pouring every ounce of sincerity she possessed into her own. I meant what I started to say earlier. I was wrong. So wrong. And I am so sorry. For everything. For hurting you. For being a coward. Tears welled again, but this time she didn't fight them. I haven't stopped thinking about you. Not for a single day in 6 years. Walking away from you was the stupidest, most cowardly thing I've ever done. And if there's even a shred of a chance, I won't screw it up again. I swear, Damien. I won't leave. He searched her face, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, the tension seemed to drain out of him. He didn't smile, not exactly, but the harsh lines around his eyes softened. He gently covered her hand on his arm with his own. His skin was warm. Solid. Real. The fragile truce held. They stood there for a long moment, caught in the wreckage of their past, the possibility of a future hanging precariously between them. Eventually, Anya gently withdrew her hand, needing a little space to breathe. She gestured towards her slightly too strong coffee. So, Captain Cross, she said, trying for a lighter tone, testing the waters. How does a guy destined for Project Nightingale end up as a city cop? She'd heard whispers over the years, rumors passed through mutual acquaintances, maybe even something Chloe had dug up. About the scholarships, the accolades, the assumed trajectory towards high-level government research. Project Nightingale was the semi-official nickname for the Advanced Physics Research Institute upstate everyone assumed he was destined for. Damien looked surprised, then uncomfortable. He took a sip of his coffee, stalling. Things change. Did they change? Anya pressed gently. Or did I change them? He looked away, staring out the tall warehouse window at the glittering lights of Port Meridian. After you left, his voice was quiet again. Everything felt pointless. The equations, the theories, it was all just noise. Empty. He shrugged, a gesture that didn't quite mask the lingering pain. Joining the force, it was concrete. Structure. Rules. Action, reaction. Something real. Something to focus on besides the gaping hole you left. The words went unspoken, but Anya heard them anyway. But Damien, she argued softly. That mind, the way you see the world, it's extraordinary. It shouldn't be buried under paperwork and precinct politics. Project Nightingale, they still talk about you, you know? ISA mentioned. She trailed off, unsure if she was overstepping. He looked back at her, a flicker of the old intensity in his eyes. ISA talks too much. But there was no heat in it. He seemed thoughtful. Seeing his vulnerability cracked open a space for her own. Maybe it was time. I wasn't entirely fair before, she began haltingly. Back then. Why I said those things. She took a deep breath. My parents, they were in the middle of the world's ugliest divorce right before graduation. Screaming matches, lawyers, fighting over my younger brother, Alex's Mr. Perfect prodigy. Suddenly, I wasn't the beloved daughter anymore. I was collateral damage. An afterthought. She traced a pattern on her coffee mug. I felt so lost. So worthless. And you were so brilliant, so sure of your path. Everyone adored you. And I felt like I was dragging you down. Like those girls were right. She met his eyes, shame washing over her. So I pushed you away. Said those horrible things. It was easier than admitting how terrified I was that you'd eventually realize I wasn't good enough and leave me. Damien listened, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension, then to a deep, quiet sorrow. Not for himself, Anya realized with a jolt. For her. For the scared 17-year-old girl hiding behind bravado. When she finished, the silence stretched, but it wasn't empty this time. It was filled with a shared understanding, a shared pain. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was hesitant, infinitely tender. So different from the captain's impersonal grip. Anya, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. God, I never knew. Why didn't you tell me? I was 18 and stupid, she whispered, leaning slightly into his touch. And proud. And scared. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at her, his eyes searching hers. Then, he gently took her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. We were both idiots, he said softly. A fragile truce. A tentative first step onto the unsteady bridge spanning the wreckage of their past. The air in the loft still felt heavy, thick with years of unspoken words and unresolved pain, but beneath it, a tiny, fragile spark of hope flickered, threatening, just maybe, to catch fire. With the ghosts of their past acknowledged and fears laid bare, the path forward, though daunting, finally seemed possible. With the ghosts of their past acknowledged and fears laid bare, the path forward, though daunting, finally seemed possible. The days that followed were a tentative dance around the wreckage, navigating the newfound vulnerability that hummed between them. They talked for hours, sometimes late into the night in Anya's loft, surrounded by the comforting chaos of her art, other times walking along the rain-slicked docks of Port Meridian, the cry of gulls overhead. They didn't try to erase the past 6 years, didn't pretend the hurt hadn't happened. Instead, they carefully, painstakingly, began to unpack it, piece by painful piece. Damien spoke of the crushing silence after she left, the way his passion for physics had curdled into ash, leaving him adrift. Joining the force, he admitted, hadn't been a calling so much as an anchor, a desperate need for rigid structure when his own world had imploded. He'd thrown himself into the black and white clarity of law enforcement, burying the brilliant, questioning mind that had once sought to map the universe. Anya listened, her heart aching with the weight of her past actions, the unintended consequences laid bare. In turn, she shared more about the toxic fallout of her parents' divorce, the feeling of being utterly disposable, the insecurity that had festered and ultimately poisoned their young love. She confessed her fear of not being enough, of being left behind, the very fear that had ironically caused her to push him away first. He listened, his usual impassivity replaced by a quiet intensity, his hand often finding hers, a silent offering of support that spoke volumes more than words. It was Anya who brought up Project Nightingale again, tentatively at first. That place, the research facility. ISA said they never really stopped hoping you'd come back. Damien looked conflicted. It's complicated, Anya. That world feels like another lifetime. But it's your lifetime, Damien, she insisted gently, touching his arm. Your brilliance, it deserves more than precinct reports and tactical vests. You were meant to chase bigger questions. She saw the flicker of longing in his eyes, the spark of the physicist she'd first fallen in love with. What if you just reached out? Saw what they said? He hesitated for days. Anya didn't push. She simply waited. Held her breath. Finally, one evening, he made the call. She watched him pace her loft as he spoke, his voice initially stiff and formal, then gradually gaining confidence, the old spark igniting as he discussed concepts she barely understood but loved hearing him articulate. When he hung up, there was a look on his face she hadn't seen in years, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. They want me, he said, sounding almost surprised. There's a senior research position. My old mentor, Dr. Eris Thorne, he's leading a new theoretical astrophysics team. They want me to start as soon as possible. Anya's heart soared. Damien, that's incredible. It's upstate, he added, looking at her intently. A long way from Port Meridian. A whole different life. Our life? She asked softly. The look he gave her then held the weight of galaxies. If you'll come with me. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of decisions and practicalities, underscored by a giddy sense of possibility. Damien formally resigned from the PMPD, facing surprise and congratulations from his colleagues, including a slightly awestruck Officer Carter and a knowing smile from Officer Riley. He didn't just transfer assets, he brought over boxes of financial documents, trust details left by his parents, things he admitted he'd barely looked at in years. He spread them out on Anya's floor, not as a precursor to a contract, but as an act of complete transparency. This is everything, Anya, he said quietly. My past, my future finances, it's all a mess, probably. But I want you. I need you to know it all. No more walls. It was a profound gesture of trust, weaving her into the fabric of his life in a way that felt solid, real. Anya, meanwhile, faced the bittersweet task of dismantling her Port Meridian life. Ephemeral Light Studios was more than just a business, it was her heart, poured into brick and mortar. Leaving it felt like leaving a part of herself behind. But watching Leo, her earnest assistant, blossom over the past year gave her an idea. She offered him a partnership, a chance to take over the studio's management, leaving him with her best equipment and client list. Leo was ecstatic, promising to uphold her artistic vision. It felt right. A legacy continued, even as she embarked on a new path. There were goodbyes. A tearful, wine-fueled evening with Chloe at their favorite tiny Italian restaurant. Chloe was predictably, wonderfully Chloe, mourning the loss of her shopping partner and gossip confidant, but fiercely happy for Anya. About damn time, Petrova, she'd sniffled, raising her Prosecco glass. Just, don't let Captain Science forget how to have fun, okay? And send me pictures of this mysterious Project Nightingale. I'm picturing lab coats and alien autopsy rooms. Officer Ben Carter happened to run into them as they were leaving the restaurant, a hopeful, awkward expression on his face as he asked Chloe if she might be free for coffee sometime. Chloe, after a dramatic pause and a critical assessment of his tie, had actually smiled, a genuine, non-cynical smile, and said yes. Anya squeezed her friend's hand, a silent wish for her happiness passing between them. Some new beginnings were sprouting even amidst the farewells. The most nerve-wracking step was the video call Damien arranged with Mom Lucia. Anya fussed with her hair, changed her shirt 3 times, and felt ridiculously like a teenager meeting the parents. But the moment Signora Rossi's warm, beaming face appeared on the screen, Anya's anxiety melted away. The older woman, enveloped in what looked like a cloud of flour, greeted Anya with effusive Italian warmth. Anya! Cara! Finally, I see the face that has put the light back in my Damien's eyes. Bellissima! She patted Damien's cheek on the screen. He tells me nothing, this one. Thank goodness for Isabella. Welcome, welcome to our crazy family. There was no judgment, no reservation, just open-armed acceptance that felt like sunshine after a long winter, a stark, painful contrast to the strained silence Anya usually received from her own family. They decided to take a final walk along the harbor promenade the evening before they were due to leave. The setting sun painted the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, reflecting off the water. They stood by the railing, watching the ferries glide past, a comfortable silence settling between them, woven now with shared understanding rather than tension. Damien turned to her, taking both her hands in his. His own were steady, warm. "Remember that night?" he asked softly. "Senior year. We sat out on Miller's Point, watching the meteor shower. You tried to teach me the constellations, but I was too busy mapping the freckles on your nose." Anya smiled, memory flooding back. "And you tried to explain orbital mechanics, but I was too busy trying to figure out how to kiss you." He chuckled, a low, warm sound that vibrated through her. "We were kids. We thought we had everything figured out." He grew serious again, his thumb tracing patterns on her knuckles. "We didn't. I didn't." He met her eyes, his gaze clear and steady. "Anya Petrova, you walked away from me once, and I was too broken and proud to fight for you. I won't make that mistake again. I don't want to calculate another trajectory, witness another supernova, or face another sunrise without you by my side." He reached into his pocket, but instead of a traditional ring box, he pulled out a small, worn velvet pouch. Inside, nestled on faded lining, was not a diamond, but a smooth, intricately carved piece of jade, shaped like intertwined stars. It looked ancient, imbued with history. "This belonged to my grandmother," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "She gave it to my mother, who gave it to me, for the woman I knew, without question, was the one. The constant star in my chaotic universe." He looked up at her, his heart in his eyes. "I've carried it for 6 years, hoping, wondering. Anya, will you be my constant star? Will you build this new life, this reclaimed future, with me? Properly this time?" Tears streamed down Anya's face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This wasn't about fixing the past, it was about choosing the future. Together. Her voice was choked, but her answer was clear. "Yes," she whispered, throwing her arms around his neck. "Always yes, Damien. Yes." The final day in Port Meridian was a blur of packed boxes, final arrangements, and the poignant ache of leaving. As they loaded the last suitcase into Damien's car, Anya took one last look at the familiar skyline, the city that held so much pain but also the seeds of their reunion. It wasn't goodbye forever, perhaps, but it was the definitive end of a chapter. Damien came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood there for a moment, watching the city lights begin to twinkle. Then, he turned her gently towards the road leading north, towards the unknown territory of Project Nightingale, towards their shared horizon. It wasn't just his homecoming, it felt like, finally, they were both going home. With rings exchanged in farewell spoken, they stepped across the threshold, leaving behind the city that held their fractured history and embracing the promise of a shared horizon. Their arrival marked not an end, but a transition, the closing of one tumultuous chapter and the quiet, hopeful beginning of an unwritten story, penned together. The drive north had been filled with long stretches of comfortable silence, punctuated by tentative conversations about everything and nothing. They navigated the winding mountain roads leading towards the secluded valley that housed the Project Nightingale research facility, leaving the grime and ghosts of Port Meridian further behind with every mile. The air grew cleaner, sharper, scented with pine and damp earth. It felt like entering a different world, hushed and intensely focused, a stark contrast to the relentless energy of the city they'd abandoned. Their new home was a small, rustic cabin nestled amongst tall pines, with wide windows overlooking a sweep of valley that turned breathtaking shades of purple and gold at sunset. It was simpler than Anya's sprawling loft, quieter than Damien's stark bachelor apartment had likely been. Unpacking felt symbolic, carefully placing her battered photography books next to his dense physics journals on the same shelf, hanging a vibrant abstract canvas she'd painted years ago opposite a framed schematic of a particle accelerator he'd sketched. Two different worlds, finding a way to coexist, to complement. It wasn't seamless, not yet. There were moments of awkwardness, echoes of old habits and hurts they had to consciously navigate. Sometimes Damien would retreat into intense silence, lost in thought, and Anya would feel a flicker of the old fear. Was he shutting her out? Sometimes Anya's fierce independence would resurface, a defensive shield against imagined slights, and Damien would have to gently remind her, and himself, that they were on the same side now. Building trust wasn't like flipping a switch, it was more like coaxing a wary bird to finally eat from your hand. Slow. Patient. Requiring absolute stillness and faith. Months bled into a season. Autumn painted the valley in brilliant hues, a visual feast that reawakened Anya's artistic spirit in ways she hadn't anticipated. The raw, often painful, emotional honesty she'd chased in her Port Meridian work began to transform. Here, surrounded by the quiet majesty of nature and the steady, grounding presence of Damien, her lens sought different kinds of truth, the intricate patterns of frost on a windowpane, the fierce resilience of a lone hawk circling overhead, the quiet strength in the weathered face of an old tree. She found herself developing a series on light and the shadows, exploring the beauty that existed alongside darkness, a theme that resonated deeply within her own reclaimed life. Damien, too, seemed different. He thrived in the intellectually stimulating environment of Project Nightingale. He came home energized, eyes bright with the thrill of chasing cosmic questions alongside brilliant minds, including his old mentor, Dr. Thorne. The sharp, defensive edges honed by years on the police force softened, replaced by a quiet intensity, a focused passion that reminded Anya powerfully of the boy she'd first loved. But it wasn't just the work. It was the peace he seemed to find here, with her. The rigid control loosened, allowing glimpses of the warmth and even occasional dry humor she remembered. He was still Damien Cross, complex and sometimes guarded, but he was no longer just Captain Cross, the man encased in ice. One crisp November evening, Anya found him sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in a thick blanket, staring up at the impossibly vast, star-dusted sky. A laptop lay open beside him, displaying complex equations, but his attention was fixed on the cosmos. She came out quietly, carrying 2 mugs of hot cider, and settled beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. He instantly wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer, a simple gesture of belonging that still made her heart ache with gratitude. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the constellations wheel overhead. So different from the hazy, light-polluted skies of Port Meridian. Here, the universe felt immediate, overwhelming, magnificent. Still trying to figure it all out? Anya murmured eventually, nodding towards the sky. He sighed, a sound of contentment rather than weariness. Always. But, he turned his head, his cheek brushing her hair. It feels different now. Less like wrestling with the darkness alone. He paused. More like appreciating the light. She smiled, understanding the unspoken reference. Their journey hadn't been easy. It was a path littered with the wreckage of past mistakes, misunderstandings, and deep-seated fears. The scars remained, the phantom ache of betrayal, the shadow of insecurity, the memory of cruel words spoken and actions taken out of pain. They hadn't magically erased the hurt or rewritten their history. What they had done, painstakingly, was choose to face it. Together. They had learned the fragile, difficult art of forgiveness, forgiving each other for the wounds inflicted, and perhaps even harder, forgiving their younger selves for being scared, flawed teenagers trying to navigate emotions too big for them to handle. They discovered that second chances weren't about getting a do-over, a clean slate. That was impossible. Instead, it was about acknowledging the damage, understanding its roots, and making a conscious, daily choice to build something new, something stronger, on the foundations of that shared, messy history. It was about choosing vulnerability over defensiveness, communication over silence, commitment over the instinct to flee when things got hard. Their love wasn't pristine, it was resilient, tempered by fire, made more precious by the very real possibility of its loss. Anya knew their story wasn't over. This quiet valley, this shared life, wasn't a fairy tale ending where all challenges magically disappeared. There would be future struggles, undoubtedly. Damien's work was demanding, consuming. Anya still had to find her footing in this new community, build new connections, perhaps grapple with moments of feeling like an outsider in his world. Old insecurities might occasionally whisper doubts in the quiet moments. Life would inevitably throw them curveballs. But looking up at Damien, seeing the quiet certainty in his eyes mirrored in her own heart, she knew the crucial difference. They weren't facing it alone anymore. Their commitment, forged in the crucible of their past and tempered by forgiveness, was their anchor. They had navigated the wreckage and found not just survival, but a profound, quiet joy on the other side. A belonging. He tightened his arm around her, pulling the blanket more snugly over them both. "You know," he murmured, his gaze returning to the infinite expanse above, "the math suggests the universe is still expanding. Always moving towards something unknown." Anya leaned into him, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke in him. "Sounds about right," she whispered. They sat there, two souls once adrift, now anchored together, watching the silent, magnificent dance of the cosmos. The future stretched before them, vast and unwritten as the starry sky itself, holding unknown challenges, certainly, but also infinite possibility. And they would face it, explore it, write their next chapter, beyond the horizon, hand in hand. Together.